Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading in charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group, ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group, ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group, ADOS, the controversial group, ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 8. I'm your host, Lisa and Daud, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from Essence, NBC News, the Columbus Dispatch, The Intercept, Black Agenda Report. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the article, Coronavirus is Making the Case for Black Reparations Clearer Than Ever.
Personality. Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question that forces us to have personalities.
Great. What questions do you have this week?
Is it the institutions or the individuals that are holding back progress? For example, is it NAACP's fault if they hold a rally and only 5 people show up?
Like many dynamics, there is a dance of dualities. There's the duality between institutions and there's a dance between individuals. Some would call this yellow journalism in terms of the truthfulness of a document that was supposedly written by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1978. It holds some validity. It holds a lot of validity. Well, in that memorandum, it's called Memorandum 46. Well, not going over it in total, one of the aspects, though, is to control and direct the desire among Black Americans to be political. And in short, you need to control its leadership. In that sense, it's very true. Barack Obama is the pinnacle. He met Obama when Obama was 20 years old and had been nurturing him. It was Zbigniew Brzezinski's advocacy for him on MSNBC that was a part of what helped turn the tide in support for Obama. So in that memo, he identified that they would have to gain control of Black leadership. They'd have to nurture it and direct it to ultimately fulfill white domination, racism, elites ends in the society. That would be a way of ensuring outcomes for them. At the same time, we would be satisfied with merely seeing a Black face in a high place. So that's one side of the dynamic. The other side of the dynamic is the population, the individual. We have had an experience of psychic shock coming out of the 60s and going into the 70s. In the 60s with serious leaders that we believed and definitely were in our Black self-interest. The assassinations of the presidents all the way to the assassinations of street people, grassroots people coming to advocate for ADOS needs. Well, that had a big psychic shock on people that the individual has gone into various forms of escapism or stress relief from that psychic shock. And so you have a meeting of those two realities. One, the leadership has been co-opted and the individual has been in various forms of escapism, not wanting to face the hard truth that we have to fight and stand. And for me, it's as simple as fighting and standing for our children. And that's why I think a lot of us actively participate in changing this dynamic. But we need more.
With ADOS trying to build a movement, whether that's locally or nationally, this is going to be an issue that we're going to be faced with. And I know we have this mentality of project takeover. Sometimes you got to be careful what you're wishing for. You're going to take over the NAACP, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to see that they reach out. They do initiatives. Mm-hmm. They do programs, and 5 people show up. So I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, that's it.
As somebody who is working with leadership in ADOS Columbus and trying to get just people to listen to other candidates. Just listen to what other candidates have to say, not just who the Democrats are telling you to vote for. It's difficult. Yes, I am here for the challenge, but it ain't always the institutions that's the issue. Engaging Black Americans is hard. Engaging ADOS is hard. Keeping them engaged, and like you said, there's a shock in them where they're just afraid to get involved, or psychologically know that if they get involved, they could possibly get hurt. They could possibly lose their job. They could possibly, whatever fear they have of joining an organization or joining with others to defeat the oppression that they're under. Mm-hmm. So I say we really need to acknowledge that challenge. It's challenging for the NAACP, the Urban League, and it is going to be just as challenging for us. To some extent, we prefer entertainment. We prefer to be entertained. Mm-hmm. And giving people the medicine, candy with the medicine, what is that saying? Is that the right?
I know what you're talking about.
So
I just don't remember it specifically.
You got to put the medicine in the candy. You got to put the candy in the medicine, or vice versa. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, moving forward, let's be realistic. ADOS, let's see the uphill battle that we have. We're dealing with psychological warfare here. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
One of the things we got to face, though, in that analysis is let's not get trapped into the current realm of understanding of this phenomenon. Even though the 60s were a psychic shock for our present period, 60s and 70s, prior to that time, we also had the psychic shocks of lynchings that were taking place in the South. That was, made a lot of people immobile. I'm saying all that background to say is that at the height of the civil rights movement, only 2% participated. I said that on Miss Angela Navarro's show, and she was shocked because people imagined that more people participated. In other words, I'm saying, and this is a positive, to get the gains that made my life better only took 2% of the population to be actively engaged in making a difference. Mm-hmm. I believe the current reality is that we need more than that, probably between 5 and 10% to make long-lasting change for the future, but we don't need everybody. That's number one. And number two, hopefully from that 5 to 10% we can get in this period, we'll be much more quality people aware of this history and won't just give up when we get some gains met or some people get assassinated, which we have to believe and know is more likely a possibility. Mm-hmm. So 2% to get the civil rights that we enjoyed that have been eroding ever since. It'll take, I believe, 5 to 10% to get better than that, which includes reparations. And therefore, a chance that things will stay for the lifetimes of our progeny, which is what this fight should be all about. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org.
As announced last week through the work of Triangle ADOS, along with Concerned Black American Citizens, CBAC, is pushing an initiative to get COVID-19 relief for Black Americans. As you can see, ADOS was left out of the HEROES Act, so the Phase 4 Emergency COVID-19 Relief for Black Americans petition needs your support. To support this initiative, number 1, sign the petition. Number 2, contact your representative about the COVID-19 initiative plan. And 3, forward the petition to 3 to 5 people. For more information, go to cbacusa.org or wethepeople.com and sign the petition.
Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
titled, Joe Biden didn't just compromise with segregationists, he fought for their cause in schools, experts say. Tagline, Joe Biden helped give America the language that is still used to oppose school integration today. Legislative and education history experts say. In a 1978 Senate hearing, the legendary civil rights lawyer Jack Greenberg had something to say to freshman Senator Joe Biden. Greenberg, long-term director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, took Biden to task for sponsoring a bill that would limit the power of courts to order school desegregation with busing. It was a move that followed the wishes of many of Biden's white constituents in Delaware. The bill heaves a brick through the window of school integration, said Greenberg, one of the lawyers who had won the Brown versus Board of Education case that ended legal school segregation 21 years earlier. And according to Greenberg, Biden was the man with his hand on the brick. Political experts and education policy researchers say Biden, a supporter of civil rights in other arenas, did not simply compromise with segregationists. He also led the charge on an issue that kept black students away from the classrooms of white students. Publication, NBC News, author, Janelle Ross. I grade this article a fair. Up next.
From the broadcast by NBC News, entitled Black Social Workers Face Stress, Racial Inequities During COVID-19 Pandemic. Tagline, the big issue that black social workers having to contend with is the devastation happening in our communities. Author Patrice Gaines. Michael Guynam, a social worker in Los Angeles, would show up at a foster family's home unannounced to make sure that the house was clean and livable and that a child was being fed and going to school. Kevin Holder, an emergency services clinician, would meet police officers at the jail in Richmond, Virginia, to interview and observe a person picked up and suspected of suffering from a mental health crisis. This was before the coronavirus pandemic. With physical contact limited because of COVID-19, Guynam now calls unannounced and views homes through an iPad. Holder talks to clients by iPad and then questions officers. It's a social worker's new normal, and it's troubling. We are now at high risk while also being the helpers. We can become our clients so quickly, said Dr. Tanya Smith-Bryce, a national relations co-chair of the National Association of Black Social Workers, or NABSW. For black social workers, racial inequality in healthcare is a major concern. The fact that we can't get tested while we know our communities are the most devastated does not make sense, Bryce said. An important part of our role as social workers, as black social workers, is to be advocates. And in this case, to advocate for more testing in our own communities. We have to put pressure on our local governments to protect our workers and to protect our community, Bryce said. That is done by a number of means, reaching out, which we can't do now, so calling offices of mayors, city councils, and the state legislature. We have to galvanize our communities to speak out. The NABSW is drawing up a policy statement with demands and recommended actions, which will be released around mid-May, she said, adding that one demand will surely be that agencies provide personal protective equipment for every social worker. I grade this good, fair for not centering on both the virus and economic impacts by white elites that will have ramifications upon ADOS into the future, but excellent for indicating that social workers must become politically activated. And next,
as a black woman in this country, I feel I need to bear arms. Publication Essence, author Nyla Burton. Black America was triggered yet again by the leaking of a horrific video showing the February 23rd killing of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery by two white male assailants, father-son duo Gregory McMichael, age 64, and Travis McMichael, age 34. On May 7th, after 2 months of eluding punishment, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations arrested and charged them with murder. The trauma of this brutal lynching, combined with the powerful imagery of three black men standing in front of a state capitol with firearms, sparked a needed conversation. Should black people buy guns to protect ourselves from racialized violence, especially during these tumultuous times? As a leftist black woman, I desperately wish we had a strict gun control. However, I'm uncomfortable not having a firearm. Many who share aspects of my politics are surprised when I express this, seeing it as contradictory. But my views are rooted in reality of the world I live in now, not the world I long for. And in my world, guns are everywhere. Most often, they're possessed by people who hate me. I grade this article a good. And up next,
from the publication, The Columbus Dispatch, author Rita Price, entitled Black Residents Overrepresented in Franklin County Black residents overrepresented in Franklin County coronavirus cases, but not death toll. In Columbus and throughout the nation, advocates for improving minority health want a deeper look at the people behind coronavirus statistics. Blacks in Franklin County do not appear to be dying at higher rates than whites, but they are overrepresented in cases and hospitalizations. Blacks continue to make up a disproportionate share of coronavirus infections and hospitalizations in Columbus and Franklin County, according to public health data that provides a snapshot of the pathogen's path throughout the city. But unlike reports from other large, harder hit metro areas in the United States, blacks in the Columbus area don't seem to be overrepresented among the deaths. A Friday tally of deaths in which the race is known showed that non-Hispanic blacks, who account for 23% of the city and county, were 20% of the COVID-19 fatalities. In Columbus and Franklin County, non-Hispanic blacks made up 29% of infections and 23% of hospitalizations. Health Commissioner Dr. Maishika Roberts said more details and more testing are needed as officials work to study the fast-changing picture of the coronavirus pandemic in Columbus and its effect on vulnerable populations. When we first started looking at zip codes, it was pretty clear it was the inner city with a lot of density, she said. Now when we look, I feel that a lot of what we're seeing are clusters from long-term care communities. The reasons for spikes and declines in certain neighborhoods aren't always clear at first. And because deaths in Franklin County have been relatively low, 110 as of Friday, analysts must be cautious about trends. Officials do know, however, that rates of COVID-19 disease are higher in parts of the city that struggle with other health problems. In neighborhoods such as Linden, the Near East Side, Franklinton, the Hilltop, and the Northland area, where the Celebrate One initiative works to reduce infant mortality, public officials have identified a COVID-19 case rate of 378 per 100,000 residents. Outside those areas, the rate is 236 for every 100,000. And next.
Title: America's oldest living World War II veteran faced hostility abroad and at home. Tagline: At 110 years old, Louisiana native Lawrence Brooks is proud of his service and says he would do it again. Publication: National Geographic. Author: Chelsea Brasted. The memories are more than 75 years old now. Cooking red beans and rice halfway around the world from the place in Louisiana that first made the recipe. Cleaning uniforms and shining shoes for 3 officers. Hopping in foxholes when his trained ear could tell the approaching warplanes were not American but Japanese. The man who keeps the memories is older still. At 110, Lawrence Brooks is the oldest known U.S. veteran of World War II. This month marks the 75th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe. Of the 116 million U.S. veterans who served, about 300,000 are still alive today, according to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Brooks is proud of his military service, even though his memories of it are complicated. Black soldiers fighting in the war could not escape the racism, discrimination, and hostility at home. When Brooks was stationed with the U.S. Army in Australia, he was an African American man in a time well before the civil rights movement would at least codify something like equality in his home country. I was treated so much better in Australia than I was by my own white people, Brooks says. I wondered about that. That's what worried me so much. Why? Rob Citino, senior historian at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, says the U.S. military then had racist characteristics of African American soldiers during the war. You couldn't put a gun in their hands, he says, of the then prevalent attitude. They could do simple menial tasks. That was the lot of the African American soldier, sailor, airman, you name it. The jobs open to African American troops depended on the branch of service and changed as the need for manpower increased throughout the long years of war. We went to war with Hitler, the world's most horrible racist, and we did so with a segregated army, because despite guarantees of equal treatment, this was still Jim Crow America, Citino says. African Americans were still subject to all kinds of limitations and discrimination based on the color of their skin. I think they were fighting for the promise of America rather than the reality of America. Of the 16 million Americans who donned a military uniform, 1.2 million were African Americans who were often being treated as second-class citizens at home, Centino says. Brooks says he never discussed these inequalities with his fellow African American service members. Every time I think about it, I'd get angry. So the best thing I do is just leave it go, he says. The military was not formally desegregated until President Harry Truman forced it with a 1948 executive order. For Brooks, who served in the Army between 1940 and 1945, that order would come too late. I grade this excellent. And up next,
from the publication The Intercept, author Michaela Lacey, entitled The Troubling History of the Georgia Bureau Now Investigating the Ahmaud Arbery Cover-Up. When the Georgia Bureau of Investigation announced last week that it would be probing the Glenn County Police Department's dismissal of the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, some people breathed a sigh of relief. It was a welcome development after the lynching of a 25-year-old black man whose white killers had been walking free for 74 days, even though the entire incident was caught on tape. But those familiar with the GBI responded with warranted skepticism. Sure, it was a step in the right direction, but at that point, almost everything would have been. Local police and elected officials for over 2 months had found reasons not to arrest either of the men, Gregory and Travis McMichael, who chased and killed Arbery while he was jogging. After all, one was their former colleague, the other his son. Hinesville District Attorney Tom Durden, the third prosecutor to take on the case, formally requested the GBI's assistance on May 5th. It was a critical moment. The disturbing graphic video, Arbery's death, had been broadcast on national television and shared thousands of times, following revelations that the Glenn County Police Department, where Gregory McMichael once worked, and local district attorneys had gone to great lengths to smear Arbery's name and protect his killers. The public outcry that followed is the reason the McMichaels were arrested at all. The GBI, which is generally revered throughout the state and is often brought in to investigate police-involved shootings of current or former officers like Gregory McMichael, to get around conflicts of interest, has repeatedly been accused of mishandling such investigations, in some cases intentionally. The agency has botched cases in which the investigating officers appeared to be motivated by racism, leading to wrongful convictions. The agency has also repeatedly failed to hold accountable and break up powerful networks of officers who broke laws in the course of their work, causing and covering up overwhelming violence. In Georgia, where the Ku Klux Klan once infiltrated every level of law enforcement, racism can play a role in violent crimes and the way they are investigated. Arbery's case is no different. There are clear parallels to the lynch mobs that routinely chased, tortured, and murdered Black Americans from the time of slavery through the 1960s. The white supremacist underpinnings of U.S. law enforcement continue to echo throughout the country, as shown by the multiple other police-involved shootings and other murders that have taken place since Arbery was killed, and are being covered up and drowned out during the ongoing pandemic. I grade this good and worth the read. And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website.
And in this month of Memorial, we would like to salute our ADOS veterans and service members who sacrifice for the good of our people.
Hut, whoop, hip, whoop, the heads are up, the chests are out, the arms are swinging and cadence count. Sound low. 1, 2. Sound low. 3, 4. Cadence count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 3, 4. I had a good home, but I lived. You're right. I had a good home, but I lived. You're right. Jody was there when you lived. You're right. Jody was there when you lived. You're right. Sound low. 1, 2. Sound low. 3, 4. Cadence count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
one of the key things that is at the heart of my thinking about the reasons why we have to have a reparations program, and it's a reparations program specifically for Black Americans who are descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States, is because there are three phases of American history that are associated with a range of deep atrocities that were directed against the Black community. And it's those atrocities that merit or demand restitution. The first phase is the obvious one, which is the period of enslavement, which ranged from 1776 to 1865. The second is the period that lasted for almost 100 years following the end of the Civil War, of legal segregation in the United States. And then the third is the ongoing damages that have been inflicted on Black Americans in the period after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And here I would include mass incarceration. I would include police killings of unarmed Blacks. I would include employment discrimination. And I would include, perhaps what's most dramatic from my standpoint as an economist, the enormous racial gulf in wealth between Blacks and whites in the United States. So the U.S. government is the culpable entity. And the reason it's the culpable entity is because it established the legal and authoritative framework that made it possible for all of these atrocities to take place. If you look at the founding documents for the United States, the founding documents engrave in them the legality of slavery. If you look at the period of Jim Crow in the United States, there was no existing national legislation that was in place that would prevent the operation of acts of legal segregation both in the North and in the South. If you look at the current situation, there's no action that's being taken by the federal government to curb police violence that's directed against unarmed Blacks. There's no steps that have been taken to compensate people who have lost family members as a consequence of that violence, nor have there been any steps taken to compensate people for being subjected to unjust or unwarranted incarceration. So it's actually there's a national responsibility that's in operation here, and the national responsibility has to be met by the federal government.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the article, Coronavirus is Making the Case for Black Reparations Clearer Than Ever. Publication, Black Agenda Report. Tagline, the COVID-19 crisis only heightens the urgency of Black reparations, which is now more essential than ever. Authors, William A. Darity, Jr. and A. Kristen Mullen. Lisa will ask the questions, and I will give the answers.
All right. First question is, folklorist A. Christian Mullen and Professor William Darity, what are the critical factors revealed by the coronavirus pandemic as it impacts American descendants of slavery?
Mounting statistics confirm disturbing evidence of racial disparities in reported coronavirus deaths. In Wisconsin, perhaps the state with the most extreme ratio of Black morbidity, Black people represent 6% of the population and 40% of the deaths. Those African American deaths have occurred at a rate of 700% higher than Black people's share of the state's population. In our home state of North Carolina, Black people account for 22% of the population, but close to 40% of the deaths.
So what explains these disproportionately large numbers of Black people dying of the coronavirus?
Black people are overrepresented in jobs designated as socially essential but paying low wages in transportation, food, and health services, as well as child and elder care. These are jobs where the physical distancing now needed for health safety is not possible. Consequently, African Americans are reduced to a Hobson's choice, either having a greater risk of outright job loss or continuing employment in unsafe occupations. Horrifying as these deprivations are, they are not new. They are just the latest example of how racism and discrimination play out in America.
Historically, have there been opportunities in America's past that could have structured a less biased, more equal society? racially?
There have been numerous historic moments when America could have eliminated racial inequality and granted blacks access to the same opportunities as whites. When the nascent republic was formed in 1776, it could have embraced black people as full citizens. At the end of the Civil War, when newly emancipated African Americans were promised 40-acre land grants, the country could have reversed many of the economic effects of enslavement. Black enfranchisement could have been protected during the Reconstruction era, and anti-lynching laws could have been passed, reversing the trajectory of racial injustice. The New Deal and the GI Bill, had they been administered equitably, could have given African Americans the kind of financial cushion so desperately needed now. And when, nearly 60 years ago, civil rights legislation was passed, the legislation was weakly enforced, and with it, the nation lost another chance to become a true democracy.
Well, after the enslavement period, what course did the U.S. government take that harmed the formerly enslaved, and what impacts did this have upon race and wealth disparities that we are all too familiar with today?
The denial of the promised 40-acre land grants and newly emancipated blacks at the end of the Civil War was accompanied by the award of large tracts of land to whites. These awards are what Neil Kashkari calls free equity. In this case, one group is provided a gift of a lucrative asset. Kashkari, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis president, defines free equity as unearned and unmerited gifts that provide a substantial boost toward economic security and well-being.
In what forms did this free equity to whites take, and how did this allow them to develop intergenerational wealth in this country?
Kashkari is referring to the 1862 Homestead Act and the Southern Homestead Act of 1866. These initiatives made grants of 160 acres to heads of household for a minimum filing fee, with the goal of occupying the Western territories. These outright gifts of real estate and its use privileges to encourage settlements and farms could be handed down to subsequent generations. With extremely rare exceptions, black people were systematically excluded from these programs, leaving them without any subsequent margin of protection, including the current economic collapse.
The current economic collapse. How so?
Ultimately, white supremacy has produced 3 stages of a grievous racial injustice: slavery, legal segregation in the United States, America's apartheid regime, and ongoing discrimination in housing, employment, policing, access to credit, and health care, compounded by mass incarceration. These 3 stages of atrocities establish the case for black reparations.
So what exactly do you two mean by black reparations?
Black reparations refer to America's denial of the promised 40-acre land grants to newly emancipated black people at the end of the Civil War. The long-term effect is black American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States constitute 13% of the nation's population, but possesses less than 3% of the nation's wealth. At the household level, the gap constitutes a black deficit of $800,000 in average net worth. To bring the native black share of the nation's wealth at least into equivalence with its share of the population would require $10 trillion to $12 trillion.
Well, the Fed and Congress have nearly doubled that in a matter of months, so this should be more than doable. This would effectively fill the racial wealth gap in America.
A suitably crafted reparations initiative can erase the racial wealth gap by raising the black level to equal the existing white level. Indeed, as we write in our new book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, we view the racial wealth gap as the most robust indicator of the cumulative economic effects of white supremacy in the United States.
How does the coronavirus pandemic more strongly make the case for reparations to aid us?
Without the cushion of wealth, black families are exposed to greater vulnerabilities. The hard realities of the pandemic make this painfully clear. Wealthier families can better negotiate unpredicted losses of income due to unemployment, vehicle breakdown, or catastrophic illnesses. Typically, black workers toil in low-wage jobs, living from paycheck to paycheck. The black unemployment rate generally is double the white unemployment rate. The implications are ominous when the overall unemployment rate is projected to reach 30%.
Why does the pandemic intensify the urgency of a reparations program?
The black-white mortality disparity can be attributed in part to the disproportionate presence of pre-existing conditions, including asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. This is aggravated by inequitable medical treatment. The deeper root of Black susceptibility to COVID-19 is greater Black financial peril, indexed by the gulf in Black and white wealth. 4 white American billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, have about as much wealth as 90% of Black Americans.
Professor Darity, Ms. Mullen, any final comments?
The federal government can pay for reparations. The rapid enactment of the legislation of a $2.2 trillion economic rescue package proves Congress can find the needed money when motivated to do so. We know now the debt can be paid. We only need the will to do it.
And before we end the interview, I would like to also mention that William A. Darity Jr. is the Samuel Dubois Cook Professor of Public Policy, African and African American Studies, and Economics at Duke University. A. Christian Mullen, the founder of Artifactual, is a folklorist, museum consultant, and lecturer whose work focuses on race, art, history, and politics. Their book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, is newly available from the University of North Carolina Press. Well, that completes this interview. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned. We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. All right. So what do we think of this article?
I thought it was one of our few, so far, excellent articles. Hit every point in concern of both the ADOS movement and as individuals, Professor Darity's and Ms. Mullen's active work, utilizing their talents to advocate for our people is fantastic. And I thought this was a very good article that outlines that their efforts.
Yeah, and I like how they added in how the impact of COVID-19 coronavirus is the disparities in how it's impacting ADOS community and how reparations is needed to rectify that disparity. Also in how they gave a little history of how each chance America had to correct its wrongs, it failed. Mm-hmm. I like how they did that timeline because it was just back to back. And this is going to again prove once again, can America correct its wrong? Coronavirus is going to highlight whether or not they do that. They have town halls and they have meetings discussing that COVID is affecting us, but there's no action after those meetings. There's no action after those town halls. In fact, there's no action in any bill that has come from the result of coronavirus shutdown that includes specific remedies that will address our disproportionate impact that corona has had on us. There's petitions for Black Americans to get specific address that we would hope people would support. There are specific leaders, Black leaders, that are asking for this assistance, and we'll see how America responds. But you got to ask, and our Democratic leaders, who we most majority support, are not asking for specific remedies for ADOS community.
And now we're back to where our personality piece started this. We're full circle. Will the conflagration between what the systems of establishment are willing to do versus where we know they should do because of our realities, will it get us to activate? And I say we are at the pinnacle point, and coronavirus has helped us in that way to face our disparities. It should get us to activate, and that's what we should expect.
And I'm hoping it does as well. And I'm hoping we're just not accepting that majority of our family members are dying, majority of our community is dying, and just accept that. I would hope that this would trigger you to get involved with an organization like ADOS so that we can fight politically for when things like this happen again, because
they will.
That's it for the main event. Listeners, you can get the link to this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Hashtag ADOS is where we grab our favorite tweets from the week under the hashtag ADOS and share them with our listeners. Today we have great tweets that we would like to share. First up, from Breaking Brown, Yvette Carnell. Obama is horrible for hashtag ADOS in our politics. We don't owe anyone anything, not immigrants and not LGBT. We are owed. These groups co-opted our history through their new black narratives, then turned a blind eye to our oppression, and in many cases became our new oppressors in brown face. And up next we have
from Antonio Moore. How did the Heroes Act forget Black America? The Black Caucus stay silent?
From Tony Blunt. Hashtag ADOS men, no matter what America, Obama, or feminists tell you, no matter what the media shows you, we did not do this to ourselves. We are not less than anyone. We are not unworthy of Black women's love or prosperity or success. I love you and America owes you. So his next tweet was, walk with your heads high, kings. We're going to get through this, not by prayers and hopes, but by deliberate unified action. By loving and supporting one another, by casting the blame not on ourselves, not on our women, but on the country that has worked its damnedest to exterminate us. ADOS men, don't be afraid to be the fullest, most masculine and untamed version of yourself. Let these run for cover while you roam your pride lands. And that territory is every corner of America. It's yours. You don't need permission. Don't repress anything for anyone else. And up next we have
this from reporting live from the Kremlin. Y'all say Black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party, as if that's something to be proud of. The pressing question is, why continually support the party that has made Black men a non-factor in Black politics? Why are you proud to support one of the parties that took Black men off the board? And next,
from Vandal, aka Reggie Trimbach. How you talk tough on one hand, then turn around and say this is not a hostage note. Enough with the tiptoeing and punk. Say reparations with your chest or just hush. Also, elites with an affluent white Jewish daddy shouldn't talk for the group. Hashtag ADOS.
From Marlon Watson. Is he repulsive to anyone else, or is it just me? Hey, Barack Obama, please don't fix your mouth to mention slavery if you are not going to talk about reparations. ADOS been experiencing the negative effects and lack of wealth from that unpaid debt. There is no other group fighting for our rights.
From Antonio Moore. If ADOS, Black America, doesn't demand reparations in this moment for the atrocities of U.S. slavery, their children will bear the consequence. House Democrats unveil coronavirus rescue bill that directs more than $3 trillion to states, individuals, 400 years of oppression that resulted in a $100 trillion wealth gap for ADOS, Black families, and we are now allowing the Black Caucus and Speaker Pelosi to make raceless trillion-dollar cash giveaways their platform foundation. There will be a consequence.
This tweet is from Chris ADOS Sacramento. Big shout out to the Sacramento and California ADOS teams representing today at the California Reparations Study Bill hearings. The bill passed the Judiciary Committee. All Dems voted yes. All Repubs voted no. On to the next committee. Thank you, Sacramento, Bay Area, LA, San Diego, and SoCal ADOS.
And that's it for today's hashtag ADOS. All of the tweets featured in this segment will be in our show notes on our website. There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. And join us live for great content and conversation Sundays at 8 p.m. on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, and in our Facebook group, where we recap and discuss this week's episode. Until next time, family, stay safe, stay strong. Peace.